Okay, well, hello and welcome back to Bookish. Today I'm doing a tag, and I'm doing a tag while driving to work because, well, I forgot to shoot a tag video over the weekend, and I'm going to do the under further consideration tag, which was an original tag created by Sarah over at Hardcover Hearts. And the idea behind this tag is you're just supposed to reevaluate some books that you read and kind of ranked or rated in the past. So that's what I'm going to do now. Her tag, her original video tag, which I'll leave linked down below, is a lot more ambitious, and she went into a discussion of more books that I'm going to go into, because this is really kind of a hard thing for me. And I said in the comment section of her video, this is a pretty challenging video idea, video concept, really, because it's hard to think back on books and decide if you were right or wrong. We have a tendency to make up our minds about books. But I've been rereading as a part of the Faulkner and August read-along, Light in August, which I've always liked and always thought was a really good book. But in this kind of rereading, I've kind of come to the conclusion that it's actually even a better book than I thought it was originally. And so that's made me kind of want to do this tag. So there are only really 3 prompts. The first prompt is to name and talk about a book that you think you were too generous to, that your initial reaction to was more positive maybe than the book deserved. And so I have 2 books here. One is The Information by Martin Amis. Now, Martin Amis is an author that I almost never see discussed on BookTube. And yet for a while in my life, Martin Amis was one of those writers who I read and was kind of on the verge of becoming kind of a Martin Amis completionist. And the book that he wrote that I'd like to reconsider here, or that I've been thinking about reconsidering, is called The Information. The Information is about 2 writers, one successful, one struggling. It kind of just explores, well, themes of the literary world, etc. And I think I read this book in the, early to mid 90s, I think, when it came out. And I think at that time I was just kind of caught up in the kind of British literary world drama, because Amos, number one, had gotten something like a £500,000 advance on this book, which at the time was considered to be a really large advance, and he had broken with his agent. His agent was the wife of Julian Barnes, and this had led to a split in their friendship. And since the book was about 2 authors, one successful and one unsuccessful, I think a lot of people assumed that the book might be about he and Barnes and their relationship. Anyway, I read the book, and I thought at the time the book was really good, because it's the first Martin Amis book I read, and I read, probably 4 or 5 others right after that, 3 others, I think. Times Arrow, Money, and London Fields. Now, I think London Fields is still a good novel. I still think that holds up. But I probably overvalued The Information because of the story behind it. The second novel I'm almost positive I overvalued was The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami. I read this and I was caught up in kind of the strangeness, the quirky storyline, the strange thing about sitting at the bottom of the well and, entering other dimensions. And anyway, and I just think that with this book in Murakami, that what you're looking at is, weird substituting for good. That novelty of the story and the approach to the story and the ideas in the story makes up for a good book. I think the writing in the book is pretty good, but the plot just doesn't hold up, and I'm not sure it fully makes sense. So that would be a book I'm pretty sure I overvalued. So prompt 2 is to talk about books that you feel like you underappreciated, that you didn't give enough credit to. So this year, at the prodding of Kelly and Jason, Kelly for Books I'm Not Reading, and Jason from Old Blues Chapter and Verse, I reread Kent Harriff's novel Plain Song. And that's an example of a novel that I didn't really like the first time I read it, and the second time I read it, I was much more caught up in the beauty of the writing and the characterization and the kind of, I don't even know how to describe. If I were a writer, I would know how to describe this. The beauty of the simplicity and the landscape and the simplicity of the language. So a second book that I've been thinking about that I underrated, and again, a book I don't think I've ever heard mentioned on BookTube, is The Sotweed Factor by John Barth. This book was published in 1960. And Barth, I think, was one type of writer, like a fairly cynical, maybe modernist writer, maybe, before, and then afterwards he entered into what people call postmodernism. And anyway, I just really liked this book, and my initial reaction to it was, it's just kind of a funny, humorous, historical fiction kind of book. But the reality is, it's really good. It basically takes a fictional work written by a man who shares the exact same name as the main character in the book, Ebenezer Cook, and a poem called The Sotweed Factor that he actually wrote, and it takes that and turns it into this kind of romp of historical fiction, in which we see Ebenezer Cook travel to Maryland. There are pirates. There's Captain John Smith from the Jamestown colony. There's Pocahontas. There's Sir Isaac Newton shows up. There are characters who disguise themselves and change their identity several times. There are weird sexual descriptions. Anyway, it's just a fairly amazing book, and I really, really liked it. And it's one of those books I feel like I need to reread. In some ways, I feel like it is the forerunner of Thomas Pynchon's Mason and Dixon. Now, this may just have to do with the time period in which they're set. So the last prompt is to name books who've stuck with you, that you still think about. And this is probably the hardest for me because there's so many books. I've been thinking a lot about The Storyteller by Mario Vargas Llosa because of its topic and how we deal with indigenous peoples and what's the best thing to do with these, what we call primitive indigenous peoples and their civilization. Should we modernize them or not? I've been thinking a lot about that. I had put on my TBR that I was going to read The Immigrants by W.G. Sebald. And so that's got me thinking about Austerlitz, which I think a lot of people is the novel that probably where Sebald first got attention, and the novel people associate with the most, and kind of the dreamlike nature of that novel, and the functions of memory and the functions of place on our memory and what that means for our identity. That those are all ideas that are in that book, and those occur to me all the time. As a historian, I kind of deal in memory, more collective than individual, but it all kind of meshes together, and that book's always spoken to me for that reason. And the last book I've been thinking about a lot is Black Leopard, Red Wolf, which, by Marlon James, which I read this year, and they're just haunting images in that book and language and themes I just can't get out of my head. The sadness, the savagery, the kinds of love displayed in that book are really things I think they're undersold, and they have a tendency to get lost in the wash of the violence, but really powerful images and language in that book. Anyway, there you go. That's my take on the under further consideration tag. Look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.